Canadian Icons, Episode 9. Hello everyone, thank you for tuning in. On this week's episode of Canadian Icons, we will be discussing the life of William Lyon Mackenzie King. I apologize for my voice, I have a bit of a cold, so please bear with me. I chose the creepy background music because this guy just looks creepy, and also because the Mackenzie house in Toronto is supposedly haunted, but we'll get into that a little later. William Lyon Mackenzie King was born on March 2nd, 1795, in Springfield, Angus, Scotland. He was a Scottish-born journalist and political agitator who led an unsuccessful revolt against the Canadian government in 1837. Mackenzie immigrated from Scotland to Canada in 1820 and became a general merchant. Responding to the discontent in Upper Canada, which is now a part of Ontario, he became involved in politics. In 1824, he founded a newspaper in Queenston, the Colonial Advocate, in which he criticized the ruling of oligarchy. Later that year, he moved to York. As of 1834, Toronto. There, his newspaper office was sabotaged by political opponents, but with the damages awarded, he set up an improved plant and later became leader of the radical wing of the province. Elected as a member of the provincial parliament for York in 1828, he was expelled 6 times by the Tory majority. He was expelled by the Tories mainly because of fierce incentives against them in his newspaper. However, he was continuously re-elected. In 1832, he visited England. He was well received by the Colonial Office. He caused the dismissal of several officers in Canada. While in England, he wrote sketches of Canada and the United States, stating Canadian grievances. In 1835, he was returned to the provincial Canadian Parliament in a reform administration. A report by Mackenzie's Committee on Grievances exposed the inadequacies of colonial rule and caused the British government to recall the current governor. But the new governor was the even more autocratic Sir Francis Bondhead. Mackenzie was elected mayor of the new city of Toronto in 1835, but he lost his parliamentary seat in 1836 along with other prominent reformers accused of disloyalty. Mackenzie then began seriously to consider rebellion, and he founded a more radical newspaper, The Constitution, in which he supported the ideas of Jacksonian democracy. As corresponding secretary for the extreme wing of the Reform Party, he communicated with Louis Joseph Papineau in Lower Canada, who was already planning rebellion. An economic depression in 1837 brought many newcomers to Mackenzie's rural meetings. That December, he assembled 800 followers near Toronto and planned to seize the governor and set up a provisional government. Inadequate organization and control resulted in failure. However, Mackenzie escaped to the United States. When an attempt to rally his forces on Navy Island in the Niagara River collapsed, Mackenzie was charged by the United States with breaking neutrality laws and was imprisoned for 11 months. While serving time in Rochester, New York prison, he wrote the Caroline Almanac, expressing his disillusionment with U.S. politics. Mackenzie was pardoned and allowed to return to Canada in 1849. In 1851, he was elected to Parliament for Haldimand. Allied to the Radicals, he maintained his position for extreme independence and incorruptibility. Refusing several government positions, he imposed the development of large-scale corporations and clung to the ideal of an agrarian democracy and small-scale industrialism. He was forced to resign in 1858 because of illness. After his death, he became a symbol for Canadian radicalism. Mackenzie is considered by many historians as the greatest Prime Minister in the history of Canada. He is the longest-serving Prime Minister at 22 years. Long after his death, in 1950, his diaries were released to the public and Canadians learned about the private Mackenzie King. Next, I want to discuss some interesting and weird facts about Mackenzie King. King had a fixation on his deceased mother. He participated in numerous seances where he spoke to her and other family members. King would use a crystal ball to communicate with his dead mother, along with other famous individuals throughout history, including a former Prime Minister, Sir Wilfrid Laurier, and even Leonardo da Vinci. Lastly, I want to talk about where Mackenzie lived. The Mackenzie House is a historic building and museum in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. It was the last home of William Lyon Mackenzie. According to an article posted by the Global News, the Mackenzie House is actually haunted. By the 1940s, the house was on its way to becoming a museum, and that's when the ghost stories begin. In the 1950s, live-in caretakers worked and lived at the Mackenzie House. It was a story by Mrs. Edmund that eventually made the newspaper headlines. Mrs. Edmund one night claimed that she was awoken by a soft touch on the shoulder. When she opened her eyes, Mrs. Edmund said there was a lady there, bending over her, looking into her face. But a few seconds later, the lady vanished. A few weeks later, Mrs. Edmund claimed it happened again, but this time, the lady, or the ghost, drew back her hand and slapped her in the face before vanishing. You can hear footsteps on the cracking stairs or spontaneous playing of the piano in the parlor have lingered along with other ghostly encounters. And apparently in 1960, some sort of exorcism took place in the house and it was recorded on television, making the museum an even bigger draw for fans of supernatural phenomena.